All right. Um, hey everyone, my name is Paul Bamson. I am a junior urban designer at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. I have just concluded my second year this month. So I started in September of 2018. So I can very much relate to the position that all of you are in now. I'm sure many of you are uh, in third, fourth, or fifth year, and you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, although it's still very faint. I promise you, it will become blinding before you know it. Um, but I wanted to talk about how to be a catalyst at various scales. And I'm going to start talking about the personal scale first. I'll then move to the professional scale, the industry scale, and then we'll see where we go from there. Um, I did want to mention that if you have any questions, I'm super laid back. I'm not super strict, so feel free to stop me at any time if you have a question about something I'm talking about. The lecture is going to start with some of my academic work, and then it will move on to professional work and stuff that I'm doing right now in the profession to kind of set myself apart still, because you still have to be able to, even when you're in a job, still find ways to continue to adapt yourself and reinvent yourself. So it's not just, I got interviewed, I got a job, and then I'm done developing. Like the developing process continues long after you've signed the contract to start working at a firm. So I'll show you some ways that I'm working on doing that. And then we'll talk about the industry scale. So stuff I'm doing in the industry with organizations like AIA and NOMA and some other things like that. And then we'll continue on like that. So this is going to be pretty laid back. Feel free to stop me at any time. But first, we're going to talk about the personal scale. A lot of times equity and diversity is definitely on the mind of many people these days. And when you are a person of color or a minority, it's always on your mind because you feel like you're representing more than just your personal self. You feel like you're representing an entire group of people, which is exhausting and tiring. But it also opens up a lot of opportunities for you to make changes based on the actions and things that you do. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about me so you can see kind of my mindset and how I address things. So let's go next. So we're going to talk about the personal scale first and how I work to be a catalyst at the personal scale. So this is a little bit about me. I was born in Abuja, Nigeria, and I am the eldest of two siblings. My sister is 11 months younger than me, so we're Irish twins, less than a year apart. I'm now 27. I turned 27 in July, which is like terrifying because 30 is also knocking on the door. And I went to the University of Tennessee, where I got my Bachelor of Architecture and my Master's of Landscape Architecture. There we go. I'll go back to the previous slide because I want to talk about that. So I really enjoy the opportunity to go to UT because all three major design disciplines are in the same building. So architecture, interior architecture, and landscape architecture. And so there's lots of cross-pollination in the studios, and that allowed me to branch out to look at landscape architecture. And I'll actually be showing some work in both of these fields. But back to who I am. Nigerians are very colorful people, both in the way we dress and in the way that we act. So if you know any Nigerians, they're typically very flamboyant and loud people, but we're full of passion. And one of my dreams is to go back to Nigeria in some way, form, or fashion and make an impact there. I grew up here, and my first time back in Nigeria was actually in 2018, just before I started working at SOM. We traveled for a month, and I knew I had to go back to Nigeria before I started working because it would be hard to take a month off to go see the rest of my family after I had started working. So I decided not to immediately start working after graduation. I was exhausted after 7 straight years architecture and design school. So I decided to take the summer off, and this was one of the best ways to spend that summer. And it really gave me a lot of perspective as to what skills I should make sure that I have shored up now, so that if I ever do make the trip back to Nigeria, I'm aware of the issues and situations that plague that country or those communities, and I can make an impact there. So if you are someone who is not native to the United States, uh, and you know the blights of the communities that that you're from face, like you should be thinking about that and ways that you can improve their lives as well with the skills that you're learning now. And that of course applies to those who were born in the States, because the United States is not a monolith. There are many small communities that go through lots of challenges. So think about home a little bit as well. So that's kind of the advice for you. So think long term. All right, so let's talk about the work that I did at UT. So this project that you're seeing here is a project that we designed in Knoxville. And this was during my integration semester, or sometimes it's called comprehensive. And one of the things I love about AIAS is that you do learn about the other architecture schools in the country and how they do things very differently. And that might even go down to as small as how classes are named. So we'd have discussions and we're like, what class are they talking about? And you're trying to relate it or translate it to your personal curriculum. But anyway, so this was our 4th year. And this tower was a renovation, and our group's task was to convert the building to be high performance sustainable. So this was a lot of research into LEED. This was our first real experience with LEED. And we were really thinking about how to not only bring the community into the architecture, but have the architecture do more than just look pretty and shade the sun. Like, how can it give back? And so we devised, and this is my idea, but we devised a solar shading system for the facade that doubled as the sun shading. So it's like, we're designing shades, they block the sun. So why can't the top side also be a solar panel that would generate electricity? And they designed them to kind of like move based on the sun angle. So they would kind of like rotate. And so you would see the facade. And I wanted to do an animation, but I didn't have the time. It would have taken forever. But each individual fin would be like moving based on the time of day. It would have looked really cool. But this was one of the first projects where we really learned about the environmental impacts of our designs, because we had to source these materials. And were we thinking about the materials that we were using in a way that would make the least amount of impact? Because every building will make an impact. Even the most sustainable building is worse than what existed there before, which was landscape ground, which performs just fine as it is. So can you make your building more than just something that that sits there and looks nice and like has all of these theoretical backgrounds, but also like generates electricity or cleans the water or filters the air? Like, can we get more buildings that do? And how can those buildings give back to the communities they exist in? Could part of the floors in your building be used to grow food in areas where there's a food desert and they don't have a grocery store nearby? Why can't your community center also double as a grocery store or double as a farm to help impact those communities? So that's not what this project was doing, but it was kind of the mindset of having buildings that do versus just buildings that look really nice. And can we do both? Let's see here next. The next project was also my first foray into what's really my main passion, which is rapid prototyping through algorithms and scripting. So I love Grasshopper it's probably my favorite tool. If you were to tell me right now that I was to use one piece of software for the rest of my architectural life, it would be Grasshopper, because it has changed the way I think about projects, and it has allowed me to rapidly iterate between different design portions by building a script, right? And so as someone who is really passionate about skills, and as someone who is a minority and wanting to give myself like a heads up or some sort of advantage or some way to stand out, scripting was one of the ways I did so. And so what you're looking at here is a residential tower, and each one of the each one of the residential pods is like 2 pods on the east and west end. And I was playing with how they would slide forwards and backwards to provide maximum views for each person in the tower. So this was a fun script to work on. This was actually kind of a passion project to get used to using Grasshopper between like my 4th and 5th year. So this wasn't even a school project. So you're like an architecture nerd or you're obsessed when you do architecture projects that are not studio based or school based at all. But I was able to include it in my portfolio, and it was a project that was often talked about in my interviews. So if you're like, my portfolio is a little light, I only have 3 projects in it, and I'd rather not revisit that second year project that I hated so much and pulled my hair out, like, do a new one. Like, nothing is stopping you from doing a new project. So if you need to boost your portfolio and you have a ton of skills now that you didn't have a month ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, like, do your own project. Nothing is holding you back from that. University of Tennessee, we had, this image is really low. There it is. Okay. At the University of Tennessee, we had several projects that were kind of like group competitions that started what was once the fall semester, but we moved it to the spring semester because oftentimes the first years had no architectural skills in the fall of their first year. So they would like pair up, a person from each year in groups. So they would like randomize list. And so you'd be paired with the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and fifth year. And this was one of the projects that we designed. It was a LGBTQ awareness center in the university, and we designed it in one of our parking lots. And our main concept for the project was, how do we address the issues that they might face in the actual form of the building? And so we designed it kind of coming out of the ground. A lot of times someone who is in the LGBTQ community, a lot of their family members and friends don't know about it. And so the current term is coming out of the closet. So we were thinking, what's the building equivalent of coming out of the closet? And that's a building coming out of the ground. So that's kind of the concept of the design. But as someone who's not part of that community, being in that space and thinking in that way was definitely really impactful, and had me get out of my own comfort zone. So I encourage you, get out of your comfort zone as often as possible, because as a designer, you are not designing for someone who's just like you. You're designing for many, many different types of people. So work to put yourself in that kind of mindset if you're not already in it. Okay, so that's architecture. Let's talk about landscape architecture. So with the 5+2, my 5th year, which typically would have been used for thesis, was replaced with my first official year of landscape grad school. So I was able to finish 8 years of education in 7, which was a huge plus, which is one of the reasons why I pulled that trigger. And it was one of the better decisions I've made. So if you're thinking about grad school and you've got do you guys get a BSA or a BArch?
We get a Bachelor of Science.
Okay, so you will have to go to grad school. Gotcha.
Yes.
So I got a BArch at the University of Tennessee. So I decided not to go get a master's in architecture because I already had, the accredited degree, so I could then go explore something else. And I still encourage you guys to think about exploring something else as well, because while NAB and NCARB might care what school you went to for architecture, the profession doesn't. So if you've got a BSA in architecture and then you go get a master's in landscape or in interiors or in industrial, it still broadens your skill set and makes you way more marketable. Anyway, what you're looking at here on the screen was a mapping exercise that we did for one of our landscape studios where we were studying the Tennessee River. The boundary that you're seeing around it is the Tennessee River watershed. So any water that falls within this boundary will end up in the Tennessee River eventually. And the river actually flows from east to west and then back north, where it meets up with the Ohio and then meets up with the Mississippi that then runs down to the Gulf of Mexico. So this watershed is part of the broader Mississippi watershed, which is the biggest in the country. Also creates so many environmental issues because every farm from like Wisconsin to like Mississippi, like all the stuff ends up in the Mississippi River and then ends up in the Gulf, which is why the Gulf is a giant dead zone. But our project here, what I wanted to analyze was energy generation by the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and how all of the points along represent either a coal-fired plant, a nuclear plant, and I wanted to compare their energy output to their carbon output. So you can see energy in blue as a circle, and then the dark gray is the carbon output. So I was looking for like what areas are producing more energy than carbon outputs, and they were often hydro plants or nuclear plants. So it's like we should be focusing more on those energy sources rather than those that have equivalent energy and coal output, or they produce more coal than they do energy, which makes no sense. So this was a fun kind of exercise to think on a broader scale. Like this is the scale of a watershed and how you can think about how each one affects how your project will come about. And part of this studio involved designing a landscape along the Tennessee River. So if it'll go to the next slide. Come on, you can do it, buddy. Okay, 1 sec. There we go. Ah, good, it's done. Looking through my file structure here. I did a purge of my computer after graduating, so I could get rid of programs like AutoCAD and Revit, which are like super heavy, and I rarely use them anyway. There we go. So there's the PDF. It's a big boy at 83 megs. Lots of stuff. Okay. Cool. Now we don't have to wait. Don't be like me and procrastinate till last minute. That's still a bad habit I'm trying to kick. Okay. All right. Next. Yep. Talked about me. Talked about my family, my education. Okay, so this project here, this was a project I called Curated Inundation. Naming projects is one of my favorite things to do as well. So that's something I actually quite miss doing in the professional world. But inundation, for those who aren't familiar with the term, means flooding, or is another term for flooding. And so I wanted to control the flooding of a landscape environment. So this location here is in Savannah, Tennessee. That's farm country in Tennessee, and they mainly grow wheat and corn, which if they flood, they die. So one of the things about the Tennessee River is that it is heavily controlled by the TVA. So the original river body is this dark gray that you see here, and you can see it goes from like this lake-like body to a really skinny channel. So that's what happens when a dam is placed along a river. It floods upstream. So that's what a lot of the lakes in the Southeast are actually just rivers that have been dammed up. And then it gets really skinny here. Now, TVA manages and monitors the water level on both ends all throughout the Tennessee River. And when there's a large storm event, they can actually release water strategically to prevent flooding in the cities. Savannah, Tennessee is one of the northwesternmost areas, which is actually the lowest end. And so they would actually prefer to flood if there was a storm event where they actually did have to release more water. They were going to flood the farmland versus flooding the city of Chattanooga, for example, which tends to happen quite a bit. So these farmers will then lose millions of dollars of cropland if that decision is made, and there's not much they can do about it. So my idea was, okay, not only has Tennessee in the Southeast lost about 70% of the wetlands in the area, but also most of our industry is flood prone or flood prone crops. So I devised a project where we would instead grow bamboo and rice, which are crops that love flooding. And in fact, you need to flood them for them to grow well. So these are both billion-dollar industries that most of the farmers in the Southeast are not tapping into. And also the environment in the Southeast is perfect for growing this type of agriculture. And also I was thinking about, can we also have this project regrow and reintroduce native fish species that are typically lined this area, and have the farmers, instead of just taking their farmland away and saying, don't farm here because it might flood and you'll lose money, it's saying farm something else that works just as well, that makes money, and also improves the environment, or modifies the environment in a way that benefits both ecology and the farmer and TVA, because now instead of being like, we're sorry, we're going to have to flood your land and cost you millions, they're like, hey, do you need a flood this week or do you need a flood next week? And they can actually start creating plans for that, to curate the flooding, hence the name Curated Inundation. So that was a lot of fun. And that kind of thinking, this project, actually, this is the very project that got me into SOM, because on one of our reviews, one of the SOM urban design partners was in that review and saw this project and invited me to an internship, and then that turned into full-time employment. So I highly encourage all of you to do your absolute best, spend as much time making your drawings badass, because people will notice. And when you stand out in front of your classmates, that opportunity is there. So, because like your professors bring by professionals all the time to reviews. So do your absolute best in each one, and take note of the people that come to your reviews, because they have seen you and have seen you present. So you'll have a better chance of getting an internship at a person's firm that's seen you review than a cold, application online where you're just one of hundreds or thousands of people that are applying to a specific firm. So pay attention to who is doing your reviews. It might pay off well for your career. Next. Okay, I'm going to talk quickly about this because I want to get to the professional stuff. But this is another school project we did in the Charles River in Boston, Massachusetts. We got to go there. Boston's a super cool city. Some of the most prestigious colleges are there, of course, in Cambridge, MIT, and Harvard, and a couple others. And the main project here was studying the project. Actually, the project title was called Parasite, which I love so much because we're designing sites that had unique symbiotic relationships with the cities they existed in. And so I specifically looked at the Charles River because I'm obsessed with water and the use of water, and thinking about how we could take this system that is highly controlled in the Boston area and upstream, which again, it's weird because it's like south, but it's technically upstream because it flows into the bay north. All of this is farmland. And so I did some mapping exercises where I was mapping the flow of water in each area, as well as the runoff of the agricultural runoff, so nitrogen and phosphorus, which are fertilizer for a lot of the crops that we need, and we need them to grow enough food because we have 350 million people to feed in this country, which is a lot. But a lot of that runoff will end up in the waterways, and the waterways here are natural, so they flow at a pretty decent speed. But as soon as it gets to Boston, it slows down to an extremely slow flow rate. And so you've got all of these excess nutrients existing in slow moving water. What's going to happen? Well, in this specific area, you get algal blooms. which are extremely dangerous. This particular species of algae that grows in this area. And so every now and then, like they'll have to close down the river to boating, which happens a lot in Boston. And they tell people, do not get in the water. It is not safe. And so I was like, okay, so we've got fertilizer, we've got slow moving water. Like, how can we take advantage of these two site conditions? And so I started getting really obsessed with algae and dove deep into it. And I learned like how algae is grown, like farmed actually. I learned about the flow of water around bends. So if you look at this diagram here, water will flow faster on the cut bank and slower on the point bar. And then the point bar, which is like the curve area, will build up material. So based on the curve of a river, it'll like flow at different rates, which is really cool. So I looked at, what does algae need to grow? How is it currently grown? Can we create factories where we are then extracting the excess, fertilizer from the water and then growing it intentionally off-site, right? So that was kind of the idea I was thinking about. And I, had to go into systems thinking, where we're looking at like, what are all the things that algae need? So sunlight, phosphorus, nitrogen, CO2. And so thinking about these systems was, really hard. So you have to diagram all of that to keep it all in your head. But you've got inputs, you've got processes, and you have outputs that you can then use for other things. So if we're growing this algae off-site, using nutrients we're pulling out of the river to prevent algal blooms, we can then grow algae intentionally and have it go towards energy as biomass, or to create medicine, or to go as fertilizer or food for fish and plants, and really create an economy around these processes that we're doing that prevents one problem but creates a ton of other benefits. And the solution I came up with was a floating wetland created by these interlocking, what did I call it? Interlocking units that would have the wetland in the center. The wetlands would then have roots grow into the water, which would create habitat for the fish, create areas where they can eat, dissolve oxygen, so it'll make the rivers cleaner. So all of these environmental benefits where plants are not just there to look pretty, again, but to actually perform a specific task that's really important for environment. Creating habitat for birds, so places for them to land, because Boston is highly urbanized, and its green to urban ratio is like not good. So it's like, how can we create increased green space in the city as well along the river? And so this is what it would potentially look like when they start getting connected. This is one of my favorite projects. It was actually my last semester before graduation. And I was really like, I'm just going to go all out and design something wild. So, creating farms that are then extracting water. We then take the wetlands, extract the nutrients from them, and then use them in the intentional farming. I was thinking about energy generation. I was thinking about everything. It was a fun project. And then I was also thinking about like, what about a small scale? Like if you're to take this and scale it down to the size of a park. And so one of our like other class projects was creating some sort of landscape canopy. And I thought, okay, I'd want to create one that's like solar based. So you'd have solar panels, algae, plants, air cleaning fabric that when exposed to the sun, the fabric then starts collecting pollutants. So this was a fun project, and this kind of thinking is what I tried to bring into the profession, as well as like sharing these skills with others. So I don't know if anyone has seen my tutorial series called "You're Doing It Wrong," but I was always the person in school that people would come to when they needed any tech advice, like, hey, how do I do this thing in Rhino? Or my Photoshop isn't working, can you help me? And I was glad to take the time out of my day to do it. I loved it, in fact, but I also had to get my own work done. So it's not sustainable to help everyone in your school. So I created this tutorial series called You're Doing It Wrong, which was a name that I made up like tongue in cheek, but then people actually liked it for like a tutorial series. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll keep it. And, it was a tutorial series where I dived into like any tool that we will be using. So I have videos on Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, Revit, Rhino, several on Grasshopper, and some other software, GIS, that I share on my YouTube channel. So I'll post a link in the chat probably close to the end, and feel free to check it out. They go in depth into a lot of things, and I actually was able to continue my You're Doing It Wrong sessions here in Chicago for our local INOMA chapter, because INOMA and NOMA in general does an amazing job as an advocate for minority architects in terms of getting exposure to architecture to a lot of young kids, and those who are in high school and college ages, and of course professionals, providing resources. And I want it to be a resource as well, because I've amassed a ton of skills in technology because I'm obsessed with it. So why not share those skills as well as my contribution? And so that's what I do. So I run workshops where professionals are free to come by who are INOMA members and take part. And then of course I just then release the video online for everyone to take advantage of. So I will share. And this is mainly how I'm able or work towards creating a personal impact in the things that I do, because what better way to level everyone up than to like share what you have and share everything that you have. So that's what I've been doing. It's a lot of fun. As well as doing workshops. So similar to what I'm doing now with you guys, we do local workshops for portfolio stuff, resume stuff. Feel free to reach out if you ever need someone to like review your stuff. I'm more than happy to do that. So we do a series of workshops at the local universities, and we're looking at ways to expand these workshops outwards or further than that, further than just in Chicago. Now that everyone is on Zoom, you can really help anyone anywhere. And it's much cheaper to get someone to help out now that you don't have to fly them out to your site location. So if you, I'm not sure which NOMA chapters are operating in Kentucky, but I would reach out if they're active or not. I honestly don't know, but keep in touch with them. Okay, so let's talk about the professional scale. I'm going to talk about, I think I have two projects that I'll be talking about how I work towards being a catalyst in the profession. And then I will talk about industrial scale, or the industry scale, not necessarily industrial. All right, so the first project that I'm going to talk about was how I kind of tried to evolve myself and my skill set at the firm that I now work at. So at SOM, it's a place where they want you to explore what you're passionate about, because they'll know you'll work better that way. And like I mentioned earlier, I love scripting, I love algorithms, and I would see the way we would do certain things and it'd be like, why are we doing it this way? Like, why are we still using AutoCAD? Why are we so I would just ask these questions, and then I would it's like, okay, when I'm asked to do a task, I was like, I'm not doing it that way. I would then build my own script to do it faster. And one of the things that's the biggest, the biggest time impact or the biggest bottleneck is modeling framework, or the models that we're using in our urban environments. Because when you're designing a city or a development of a city, changes happen every day. And when you have to remodel all of the streets, remodel the parcels, remodel all the massing, because your design director or a partner said we should probably remove that road, which not only changes the road, but it also changes the parcel. It then changes the massing that's on it. And when you have to make several of those changes every day, it's a huge bottleneck. It eats up a lot of time. It makes projects really expensive. So I was thinking, okay, how can I speed that process up by building tools that can help do the manual stuff that we know how to do and do always, but how can we speed that process up? So I spent several months developing the first version of this tool set called Urban Framework. And it starts with using center lines for for a city, right? And center lines. So the typical process would be to draw these center lines in AutoCAD, and then use AutoCAD's awful offset commands to create all the offsets on all the roads, and all the roads would vary in offsets. So one road would be, 10 meters, and another road would be 5. So you'd have to then do all of that, and then you have to go in and like trim out all of the intersections of all of those lines to then create the parcels, and then you would then model all of the buildings on those parcels. So if we got rid of an entire boulevard or avenue or street or road, we'd have to remodel all of the parcels adjacent. Huge time suck. When you have to like work at the faster scale that is the profession, right? So in school, it's fine. You could spend all night doing something, but that is not the case in the profession, because the time you're spending is money. It's time that they have to bill a client. So you have to work faster, and you have to find ways to work faster. So this was kind of the way that I addressed it. So I built the script. What the script does is it takes the road center lines. It then offsets all the center lines. I don't have I should have included that in here. But it takes those center lines, it offsets them. You can then trim them or modify them however you like. And then the script will automatically create the offsets and clean up the interior portions. So if you've got 2 lines intersecting, it'll find the gap in between them. And then it creates your parcels. And then as a designer, you then go in and specify all of the types of parcels. So I want landscape in this parcel. I want buildings in this parcel. And the buildings I want here, I want mid-rise. I want residential here. I want this section that I've cut out to be water. And then once you've specified all of those, and by specifying, I mean like placing a point that's in a layer called park or parcel inside the area, and then would then specify, and then it would kick it, this is so fun to build, but it would do all of the splitting and creating the intersections and framework here. And then you would specify the land use of each one. So yellow for residential, orange for mixed use, red for commercial, green for park. It would then split out those parcels into their respective land use, and then generate the geometry that way. So now, instead of us, saying, let's get rid of that road, and then we have to remodel all of the adjacent parcels, we can just delete the curve, and then Grasshopper would generate the geometry again. So that was a really fun project to work on. And then it's thinking about then how do we make it do more? So can we have it analyze traffic patterns, so we can have a workflow where we're getting real-time data from it? So this was a very much early beta version of the project, and we're currently developing it further because we'd like it to be able to be used firm-wide and not just in the Chicago office, but like how can this really be something that can be deployed? So that's in the works now. But your skill set might not be scripting, but you do have certain passions that for some reason every project you do, you address this specific part. So find ways to strengthen that and become the best at that, because you can make a huge impact wherever you end up with that skill set. So always be thinking about that. Like, what is the thing that I'm always obsessed about and somehow finds its way in all of my projects? For me, it was, how do I do this faster? And how do I make it do more than just making an awesome model and then doing drawings? But like, how can it like be alive and change? That was always my thought process when I was doing projects. And now it's like part of the work that I do every day. Okay, so let's talk about a project. So this is the Atlanta University Center is a consortium of some pretty famous universities in Atlanta. Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta University. And what I didn't know at the time was that those universities were like neighbors. And by neighbors, I meant like they might as well have been considered the same campus. I didn't know that. So when we got invited to do this master plan for the Atlanta University Center, my colleague, David Scully, who is 10 years in the industry now, he's kind of like my big brother. He's African-American, grew up in Chicago. He's amazing. You should definitely, check out some of his lectures or work online. So find a mentor as quickly as possible when you get to a new office as well. Another pro tip. We went to Atlanta together to meet with the Atlanta University Center, which has membership from each of the major universities. And our goal was to learn as much as we could about the community. One interesting thing about these universities and where they exist, let's see if we can get to a map here. So this is downtown Atlanta over here on the right. And then this is low income neighborhoods. So the communities surrounding the actual campuses, this is Spelman, Morehouse is here, Clark Atlanta University, which is like the lesser known brother of these like two Titan schools, but Clark Atlanta University, also an HBCU in the area. And there's another university that's really small here. I always forget its name because they're not. The relationship between them and Clark Atlanta is weird. So that was another like drama thing we'd have to learn about and learn how to work our way around. But anyway, so the Atlanta University Center, we had to learn about like how these schools have historically interacted with the surrounding community. And the thing is, it's been a pretty strenuous interaction because most of these campus buildings are gated off. Spelman is an all-girls university, so they want to protect their students as much as possible. So it doesn't make the campus very accessible. But one of the things that happens a lot in these 3 universities or 4 universities is that their students have cross-pollination in terms of classes. So a Morehouse student can go to Spelman and take a class and vice versa, and to Clark Atlanta as well. So we wanted to create not only a master plan that would benefit the universities, but also would benefit the broader community. And so we wanted to get them involved in the process as much as possible. So we met with stakeholders, we met with community members, and we would make these giant boards with questions about like, what would you like to see in your community? And we would collect all of these comments. And it's really hard when you're dealing with like 600 comments to distill them down to a point where you can then apply them to a project. But that work really allows you to gain a broader understanding of what the community actually needs. We also met with local leaders around the community. So for example, we met with the churches in the area because the churches are very much involved. The churches own land that we would then be working with. So we would have to get their approvals to do certain things. So it's a lot of times in urban planning projects, it's all about getting buy-in from all of the stakeholders involved, all of the landowners and the community members who would be using these environments. So that was something we did often with this project. And so we were looking at, okay, what does the community actually need? Does it have proper housing? Does it have adequate office space? Does it need more green space? And where would those green spaces make sense? How can we create safe environments that are connected to the broader city? So we were looking at, for example, if you've ever been to Atlanta, the Atlanta Beltline is this really awesome Rails to Trails project that's been in development for the past 20 years or so. In fact, I got to meet the guy, this is him right here in the lower left corner. I got to meet the guy whose thesis brainchild started the project back in the 90s. So can you imagine doing a thesis project and then it becoming real in your city? Well, he lived that, which is amazing. So he's kind of like an Atlanta superstar in that way. He's no longer directly involved with the project, but he kind of keeps his, he keeps his ear to what's going on with the city, which is awesome. So, check it out. It's really cool. But yeah, so thinking about how to connect the campus, because right now there isn't a very clean connection between the campus goers and the Beltline right now. So we wanted to see, and this part of the Beltline has been constructed. So, we were looking at ways to provide, was it tram access for students? So they wouldn't necessarily have to drive everywhere because Atlanta, of course, as we know, is one of the most sprawled out cities in the country. So we're having to think about transportation. We're having to think about density. We're having to think about public access. So a lot of the project was figuring out the best ways to do that. One of the ways we did that on the campus here is you're looking at an existing aerial. So there's this huge, colossal parking garage right in the heart of campus. And when we saw this, we were like, no, why would you put such valuable real estate as parking? Oh. So one of our ideas was, how do we connect Spelman, which is here, and Morehouse with some sort of amenity that would bring them closer together? And so we proposed moving the parking somewhere else, or potentially underground, and converting that center space to a quad that would actually represent all of the different campuses that exist here. So I created paths, and this part I had the most direct influence on, which is a lot of fun. But I designed each path points towards the center of a specific campus. So looking at the paths that connected Morehouse to it, the paths that connected Spelman, Clark Atlanta, and looking at ways to start bringing more greenery into the environment and creating a safe place for students to gather for events, concerts, flea markets, protests, any number of outdoor events we wanted to bring into the community. So looking at ways to like say, hey guys, like the parking garage is not doing you guys much good. I know it's providing lots of necessary parking, but let's place it elsewhere and have this valuable land do something better for the community. One thing that was also really interesting is, of course, these universities are steeped in history. A lot of the quads that exist are like sacred. Like they're not just quads where anyone can go grab a blanket, have a seat, have a picnic. Like they're used for very specific things. And so we wanted to create a public quad that people can use for hanging out, talking. So this is a rendering in the quad, studying, meeting up with friends, and also a quad that's public. So other people in the community can come and use it as well. So it's not just specifically a university thing. And so we wanted to take something that was like very much students only. So this is a picture of us walking through. You can see, this is David. You can see like he's holding our giant like map that we had markers for. Whenever you want to look hyper official, just have like a drawing board with you or some sort of rolled up thing. You'll always look hyper official. You'll get in anywhere. Anyway, I'm just joking. So anyway, so we wanted to create those spaces and have the architecture serve multiple purposes, as well as creating great public spaces. We wanted to improve the street life quite a bit. A lot of the streets are underdeveloped, and a lot of the priority and funding goes into like preserving a lot of the historic architecture, but not a lot of that money is used towards making great streets and public spaces, because most everyone drives everywhere, and not enough people walk around, because it's typically either not safe or it takes too long to get where you need to go. So those are things that we wanted to improve with the project. We also wanted to improve the gateways and the faces of each of these campuses. Like, what do people see when they come? Because right now they see a gate that says, you cannot pass, right? You shall not pass, because you're not a student. I'm so glad some of you caught that. Thank you for being nerdy like me. So we wanted to create a brand new promenades and entrances for each of these universities at the different corners, right? So this would be Clark Atlanta's entrance to the north, great bridge that goes over, not so great highway, or Morehouse to the south, which actually will connect to more development that's happening on the south side of Atlanta, which is great. And having it be more inviting to each visitor to the site location. Okay, now let's talk about some industry scale stuff that I'm working on. So this will be mainly talking about NOMA, because I'm highly involved with NOMA. So I'm going to show you some stuff that we did in the last conference in Brooklyn, New York, that happened last year. This year, we were supposed to meet in Oakland, California, and then COVID ruined those plans. So I was like, oh no, I wanted to go to Oakland so bad, because I'd never been to California, and I saw Oakland in Black Panther, and I was like, yes, I have to go there and check it out. I will have to put that on hold for now. But anyway, while we were in New York last year, I got a chance to present at the conference. So I did one of my You're Doing It Wrong workshops on how to use Grasshopper to speed up certain parts of your workflow. So I literally designed a tower from scratch using only Grasshopper. So the only input in Rhino was like two curves, one being the outer boundary, the footprint of the building, and the other being the core. And then I generated the whole tower. And the idea was to show how these tools are out there. And most professionals are stuck in a trap of only using the tools they knew how to use when they graduated from college. And so each year as new graduates graduate, you don't have enough time to learn new skills. And that's a huge problem in the profession, one that I'm trying to tackle at an industry scale. So I'm actually going to be doing a part 2 of this workshop at the next conference online in Oakland in a couple months. But looking at the integration of Grasshopper, Rhino, and Revit, because industry standard is to use Revit, but Dynamo, which is Revit's Grasshopper, is like not great. But there are new tools actually coming out, like called Rhino Inside. Is anyone familiar with Rhino Inside? Oh, I'm about to blow the mind. Okay, so Revit, so McNeil, which makes Rhino, and of course Autodesk, which makes Revit, are working on a new Rhino, basically Rhino 7, which is right now in beta, so it's called Rhino WIP, Work in Progress. And it comes included with a plugin called Rhino Inside, which allows you to launch Rhino inside of Revit, like full Rhino inside of Revit. So things that you do in Revit in Rhino will show up automatically in Revit using Grasshopper. So sick, like huge game changer. So I'm going to be talking about that at the next conference. That's going to be really exciting. But it's something that we're exploring, especially in our architecture studios, because they work. And I'm really glad that I'm at a firm that does this, but they work hand in hand with Rhino and Revit all the time. And they jump back and forth. So most firms are like, we only use Revit. I'm like, oh, you're missing out on like so much stuff, because Revit is so restricting as a design tool. It's an amazing documentation tool, not a great design tool. And Rhino is an amazing design tool, not a great documentation tool. So how can you take advantage of both skill sets? So anyway, so that's something that's coming up at the next conference. This is my squad. Many of them work in Chicago, and finding a community is like super important. A community of people who think like you and think very opposite from you, because we don't all think the same. There's no such thing as a monolith. But having a strong community in the design world is one of the best ways to make an impact in your own, where you live, right? So get a good group of people around you wherever you end up. I highly recommend moving to a different city. I did not grow up in Chicago, but I love the city, and I'm trying my best to make an impact here so I can make an impact in other places. So get a squad wherever you end up, really important. And also meet with, like, if you've got an office with different, if you're in a firm with different offices around the country, meet other people in your different offices, because you never know if you're like, hey, is there an opening in New York? I'd like to move up there. And they might say yes, and you move to a different city, although you work for the same firm. So get to know people in different offices. You never know how that might work out for you, if you happen to work at a big firm that does that. If you work at a single location firm, then of course, still meet people, obviously, because you never know. But build your network as quickly as you can. So as soon as you graduate, like, you need to be meeting people often, because you never know how that will turn out. So anyway, I left this last slide as kind of an open question, because it's something that I'm currently thinking about. I'm still very early in my career. I'm only 2 years in, but I'm always thinking about how to make the biggest possible impact and how to be as visible as possible. Because as someone who looks like me, who didn't have anyone who looked like me doing what I'm doing now, because I just wasn't aware of that world, it wasn't exposed to me, how can I be as visible as possible to inspire the next generation of badass designers to do really cool things, no matter what color they are, right? Because if you see someone doing something that looks like you can do that thing as well. I truly believe that. Of course, there's so much inequity in this country, and I I recognize that I'm like super lucky and super blessed to be able to do what I can do. So I want to like do the most I can possible to be as visible as possible, but also like how can I make an impact on the country scale and also internationally? And this is kind of a quandary I've had with architecture. It's kind of like a bittersweet type of thing. So let's think about the most prolific designers. I mean, designers who have been cranking out buildings their entire 50 or 60-year career. How many buildings did they put out? Like 100, 200, 300 buildings, right? Max. And how much impact will 300 buildings make on the world? Like truly. It's pretty small, right? On a global scale where like we've got climate change, some of our cities might disappear into the ocean in the next 100 years. So like how does one designer or one firm make the biggest possible impact? And so I've kind of been thinking about that. And as someone who's really obsessed with building tools and scripting and designing, you know, is there a way I can affect how design is done so it can be done better and in therefore affecting all buildings? So it's kind of a like a super abstract thing that I'm thinking about anyway. But that's pretty much it. That's all I had for you guys. Feel free, please. We'll leave the rest of the time for Q&A. So if you got questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thanks, guys.
Can you post the link to your tutorials, please?
Oh, absolutely. So let me do that now. Let's see. Let's actually use this computer. I've got two computers here. I've got my work computer and my personal computer, and I often bounce between them to get things done. Also very handy. Any other questions?
Paul, I had a question, just a quick one.
Mhm.
What would you say would be some tips for students to get more involved with trying to impact the community? I think there's kind of this repetitive thought that, I mean, we're just students, so what can we actually do?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. It's one of the things that we try to tackle in AIAS through Freedom by Design. But I think that Freedom by Design is awesome, but it's not the only thing you can do. So one thing I would encourage you guys to think about is like look at what other, you know, what other organizations are doing, and see if you can plug into that. So what do I mean? Like, for example, your local Habitat for Humanity, or your local like Red Cross, or other organizations who would actually really benefit from a designer. Here's why. We think in really amazing ways. And it's weird after you graduate and you get back into the world, how differently you think than your peers who studied law or medicine. Design thinking can make a huge impact in so many other aspects than just designing buildings. So if you want to make an impact and you just finished your Freedom by Design project and you're looking for what to do next, like look outside our industry, because you can probably make a huge impact in food banks because you thought of a better way for them to transport food from one location to another because you noticed a connection that no one else was thinking about. So there are a ton of other ways that you can make an impact other than design, just because of the way you think, which will take you a long way. So explore.
I don't know if you can see the chat, but Ben asked what networking organizations or events impacted you the most?
Good question. Yeah, easy AIS. But I'm not just saying that because it's like, oh, I was a I was the South Quad director at some point, and blah, blah, blah. Like, actually, it really was. Because my main network is built of peers. So I need to actually do a better job of networking more with like industry people because I'm now in the industry. But the most people I know are like who are now they're now peers in the industry. So I didn't do a bad job. But I got to know as many people through IAS as possible. Like I know someone in every state almost. Because I got really involved. I went to grassroots. I went to forum. I went to as many quads as I could, and I met as many people as possible. And now I've built that network that will serve me for many decades to come. Because I can hit somebody up in California and say, "Hey, I need a place to crash," or "Hey, we have a project coming up, and we were looking for someone to help us work on this project. Is you or your firm available?" So that's a long-term networking opportunity that will pay off dividends later. So get to know as many students as you can who are in your year or just above or just below, because those are going to be the peers that you work with for the longest. So AIS is number one. Then NOMA is number two, because I've then met peers who are doing really cool things in terms of community design. So what I presented now, like today, I barely scratched the surface as to what I've been involved with, or how can I put this? My passion and expertise is more focused on skill sets and industry stuff. But I have peers that are way more focused on community engagement. And so I'm learning a ton from them. And I realize that that's their passion, and I feed off of their passion, and they feed off of my passion. So they can do their job better in certain ways because they know faster ways to do things. But I'm learning how my specific skill set can then eventually end up affecting communities because I'm able to help do better designs quicker. So, so realize what your skill set is and don't beat yourself up that you're not as good in a certain thing as someone else. Figure out how you guys can work together. But yeah, so I'm not sure what the original question was, but networking, right? So yeah, so get to know as many first get to know as many students who are working with you as you can. Are there any projects, buildings that stick out in your mind as a point of inspiration, either at work or studio? Good question. So this is like when you become hyper popular very quickly, like you become a cliche. And one of the firms that's like the biggest cliche is Bjarke Ingels Group. But I've always been obsessed with their work, and I am an unashamed lover of their work. One of my favorite projects, actually, this project here was inspired by their project. I used their project called the Vancouver House in Vancouver. Familiar with that project? That's my favorite big project. But the one that you're looking at here was kind of an early experiment with that. But it really inspired presentation. Yeah, keep going. This one. So if you look up the Vancouver House and you look at this, they're like almost identical. They're not identical, but they're pretty close. But their work always, the reason why I love their work so much is because they try their best to solve the specific problems of a site by the form of a building. And that's what drives much of their criticism of their firm, is that they just do the same thing over and over again. They take a bunch of boxes that are stacked and then they just rotate them. It's like, yeah, but it solved the problem of the site. so it works. So that's kind of like my main rebuttal. But anyway, I love that firm. That firm is really awesome. Another firm that like does a lot of really amazing work is Mass Design Group in Boston. Are you guys familiar? If you're not, you should be. They're doing they're probably the leading firm in equitable architecture, because they do a lot of great work, not only in the United States, but in Africa. So they were actually on my list of firms to apply to. But I just liked Chicago more than Boston. So I made my choice based on city. I think city was like a way more important decision for me than the firm, to be honest, when I graduated, because I knew I was gonna, if I didn't like the work I was doing, I was just gonna pick a different firm. But anyway, side note, their work is amazing. So Mass Design Group. Any other firms? I can recommend some landscape firms that you should look at if that got your blood pumping. You're like, oh, that looks really cool. So Nelson Bird Waltz, they're an epic firm in Charlottesville. I actually got to intern there one of my winter breaks. So I even use my winter breaks for internships, guys. Like that 2-3 week period between Christmas and New Year's is a golden time to get an internship, because then you can still put that firm on your resume and you have a connection with another firm. So don't waste your winter breaks either. And so they're a great firm. Tom Leader Studio, another great landscape firm. Let's see, we work with a lot of these firms actually, because SOM is not a landscape firm. And I debated whether, because originally I wanted to join a firm that did both architecture and landscape. There are very few firms that do, by the way. So, and by very few, I mean like there are a couple hundred of them around the country. But like the most popular ones are like Weiss Manfredi in New York. Like, oh God, I'm obsessed with their work. They're another firm to mention. Okay, you're very welcome. Feel free to just get my contact from Haley, and if you need to, send me an email or something, or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it doesn't matter. Weiss Manfredi does a lot of really cool work. Olsen Kundig in Seattle does really cool work as well. Any other questions? Let me make sure there isn't anything in the chat I'm missing.
Yeah, I threw one in the chat. I don't know if you saw it. I was asking, how has COVID impacted your firm's work? And have you had concerns about the longevity of your position as kind of a newish hire in the firm with budget cuts that are sure to come at some point if they haven't already?
Yeah. Good question. So I'm in my office now. It's also my home. I've been working from home since March, and it has been, and what's also interesting is that we had just finished our new office renovation. And the week we were to move into the new office, COVID hit and we went home. So I haven't seen the new office yet. I mean, I went there once to pick up some equipment, but so that kind of put a damper on our plans. COVID hit hard. Many projects were put on hold, they're stopped, and there were layoffs in the firm. I was lucky enough to keep my job. There were salary cuts, but that was firm-wide, so everyone was affected, including partners, and that recently ended, which is awesome. But it was definitely a weird time, and one of the things that occurred was we all realized that like everyone could work from home because we have to do it. So like, I think forever the argument that we work in office only is dead forever. So I think this will create an opportunity for people to be able to work remotely full time, even after this blows over. And that creates opportunities for you, because you'd be like, I'm gonna live in Hawaii, but I still have my job in Chicago and still able to do all the projects, because we've all been forced to do it as a world for the past several months. It's also affected the way we think about the work that we do on a daily basis. So a lot of our projects have actually changed direction because of COVID and the impact that it has made. An example, if more and more people are going to work remotely, will there be a stronger need for office space? That'll literally change the fabric of cities, because less and less people will be conjoining in downtown where there's like lots of traffic. because more people are going to want to remain working from home because it's actually really nice and convenient. It just means you have to be more, it just means you have to be more, you have to communicate a lot more. You have to be in more meetings, and you have to be like more reliable almost because you're apart, or you have to prove that you're still being as productive. That's been a downside of working from home that I have not enjoyed. I do not like meetings. Like, if we can figure out the issue with a couple emails, great. But I'm not saying meetings are bad. Obviously, meetings are great. But when you have like 4 a day, it sucks. And you're not nearly as productive. So trying to find the balance between meeting and working has been an interesting adjustment for sure. Any other questions that you were asking about? Like I said, I was lucky enough not to get laid off or even furloughed. One of the reasons, I think, was because I made sure that I was indispensable to the best of my ability. So I spent, and this is all work that happened even before I got to SOM. I spent many, many hours beefing up my skill set. I've watched thousands of hours of tutorials on everything, and now I'm able to do them. So if you want to make sure that you're someone who is unfireable, make yourself indispensable. I'm not saying everyone go learn Grasshopper now, but I'm saying whatever you do, make sure it is extremely good and to the best of your ability. And make sure that it's something that your firm is currently missing or is something that they want to improve on. So it's like, we can't fire Haley. She's this person, or she's extremely valuable with this. So like, we can't fire her. So you want to be that person as quickly as possible. So I made that. So I worked over the past 2 years to do that. And potential plays a lot of has a lot of weight in that game as well. Because they want to see what you'll become as well, just as much as what can you provide now. Firms are really good at saying, okay, this person might be a really amazing project manager or a really amazing future partner in 10 years, or this person is amazing with our clients, right? Like, all that stuff matters and is part of your skill set. So spend time when you're bored, like, instead of, playing Fortnite or watching another movie on Netflix, like, watch a tutorial for an hour, like, beef up your skill set in Revit or Rhino or Grasshopper, and it'll pay off way down the road. So always think of that time as investment, not as chore, and it'll pay off.
You kind of hinted at it.
Go ahead.
You kind of hinted at it, but I was just wondering, what's your 5-year plan from now? Because you have your 2 years there already. Where do you see yourself or aim to be in 5 years with your career?
Yeah, good question. So I'm kind of in a weird position because I'm not earning hours to either licensure path. I could get licensed as an architect, or I can get licensed as a landscape architect. I can even get licensed as an urban designer. But a weird thing I would have to actually change the course of my career in order to get licensed in either one of those fields. Except for urban design, I can keep going and get my urban design license, which is not very hard at all to do. But it's just studying for a couple exams and taking them. But if I wanted to get licensed in architecture, I can take the exams now, and I'm thinking about making 2021 my exam year. It was supposed to be 2020, but every 2020 plan in existence got derailed. But my 5-year career, thinking about, I think I can have my license, at least in architecture, in the end of 5 years from now, for sure, easy. And that would mean at SOM, I'd probably switch to an architecture studio for a couple months to gain those hours in the various areas. And of course, during that time, taking the 6 exams. But I definitely want to be a licensed professional within the next 5 years. That's number one. Number two is to solidify my value in the firm in some way. Being a specialist is often is not like looked down upon, but it's not usually the path they prefer you to take. They prefer you to be someone who can be more of a generalist. But I personally like to hyper focus on specific things. So because I enjoy doing those things the most, but that doesn't mean I don't like to do, other aspects of design. But I want to be someone who can make a really big impact in the firm and be a leader in a specific aspect that might not necessarily be management, because management looks really awful. I've seen the spreadsheets they have to do. They have to like plan out weeks ahead. They have to like I wouldn't want to be a project manager at all. Like I'd want to remain technical. And each firm does it differently, but you've got career paths, opportunities, and mine will most likely lean more on the technical side than on the management side, or even on the design side, actually. So, like, I'm more interested in how can I make design better than necessarily designing myself. But that's just me. But in 5 years, at least, I should be licensed in something, which will, of course, then, I'll make more money, which is awesome, but also be able to make more of an impact and have more freedom to do other things as well, because licensure provides you with that flexibility. So that's kind of thinking. That's vague, but I mean, it's always changing. I think about it differently now than when I started. Like, it has evolved over time, and your 5-year plan should evolve. If it doesn't evolve, then either you didn't think broadly enough, or you shot for the moon and ended up on the moon, but you should have been shooting for the stars so you can end up on Mars. Like, I don't mean to rhyme, but that happened. But like, that's kind of how I'm thinking, and it's always changing. Each year it's different. So real quick, show of voices. What years are represented here? So what years in school are you guys? You just say a number.
3.
3.
Third.
First.
Hey, first year.
First.
Okay, so I heard a majority 3 and 4. That's kind of scary. This is a weird time to graduate. Yeah, this is a very strange time. I'm hoping things change over the next year. So what I would be doing if I were you at this very moment is, of course, obviously skills. Portfolio. Like, start on your portfolio now and spend several months working on it to make it like super sharp. Revisit old drawings from your first, second, and third year of projects you think are actually good enough to still include. Like, revisit those projects. Like, here, I'll actually show an example of what I'm talking about. Real fast. I'm gonna go to my issue. I used to pronounce this wrong, by the way, because I was like, it has 2 U's, so it must be like issue or something. But then someone was like, no, dude, it's just issue. And I was like, no way. And I'm like, yeah, that was really disappointing. Okay, so here's an example of a drawing that I revisited from one portfolio to another. I was very prolific in my portfolio usage or creation. I wanted to kind of, and I used them to get my 5 internships, I think. Yeah, I did 5 internships before I graduated, which is a lot. But I made sure that I had the most experience possible. So if you're in your 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th year, like, fight for internships. Like, this winter break, like, you should be reaching out to firms now to see if there's any possibility of you getting some time there, which will help you once you graduate. I think I opened both. But an example of a drawing that I revisited is this axon. Let's see. Yeah. So take a look at this guy. This was directly after presentation. Like, we didn't have a lot of time to spend on our drawings. So it's like washed out, it's faded, line work's not strong. So this is a drawing like right after we were done, right? And I included it in my portfolio because it's not a bad drawing, but it could definitely be improved. So when I did my most recent portfolio, I went back and spent like a week on that drawing alone to really improve it. And I think it made a huge difference. So revisit your old stuff, because you're better now than you were when you first made that drawing. Believe it or not, you have way more skills. So revisit old drawings, spend time to make them better. So much more color and texture. Shadows are better. The line work smacks. So anyway, and I didn't fill out the whole page because I wanted to have it fit a little bit better. So anyway, revisit your old stuff. So yeah, so skills, portfolio, reach out to firms now for like winter break and for next summer to see what their opportunities are. And apply to as many firms as possible. If you're applying to 5, that's not enough. You should be applying to like 15, 20. And think broad and think countrywide. Don't just think in your city. Like be available to move for a couple weeks, which is hard, but you'll make money because they don't do unpaid internships anymore. Like they killed that many years ago. So we need to thank our older colleagues for fighting the good fight before we got to where we are today. Yeah. Any other questions?
Have you ever thought about becoming a professor yourself? Because you talked a lot about your video tutorials and your little workshops you host. It just seems like a very good fit for you if you ever want to step away from working in the industry directly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually was thinking about running a class at IIT this past year. Plans didn't work out for that, but it's definitely on my mind. I enjoy teaching quite a bit. It's fun. And so, yeah, it's definitely on my mind. When the stars align, I'll definitely look into that avenue. And it'll either be a class, like a technical class, or a studio that I do alongside work. But yeah, it's always been on my mind. And it will continue to remain on my mind until I actually do it. But yeah, I've definitely thought about teaching for sure. It's a great way to make an impact as well in your local community because you're making the future architects in your city better. And also you get paid more because now you have 2 jobs. So that's always a benefit too.
Is there any questions for Mr. Paul? Okay. Paul, I will ask you when we're done to stay on just for a few minutes. I know it's late, so apologies. A few quick announcements. There's quite a few first years on here. This Sunday, there's interviews for the first year position. I talked about it during class the other day. If you guys are interested at all, please shoot any of the board members a message, email, text, whatever, and we'll get back to you. And then there's a second position called the Advocacy Director, which is new to our board of directors. It'll be the first time that it's going to be included. And essentially, you would be in charge of researching and promoting advocacy topics for our chapter. So if that's something you'd be interested in, please reach out as well. But if there's no further questions, I ask to please give a round of applause for Paul. He did a wonderful job. And yeah, see you guys at Critique on Monday.
Apply. Do it. Do it.